Hello, nerds, and welcome. You are aboard the Crossing the Nerdverse flagship fandom, and tonight we are going to be talking 40K. I am joined by my awesome co-host Eric, and we have something kind of special, kind of cool tonight. So Eric has been kind of walking down his own road into an extraordinarily complex fandom in 40K. With Space Marine 2 coming out, a lot of people are starting to come into that fandom. So we're going to talk about it a little bit. And fortunately, we're going to start tonight's episode off with some, fan questions that came into us from last episode. Eric, you happen to got all the names of the questions lined up, my man.
So the first one that we were asked about was the Salamander army. And I guess we should go more of a broad with it.
Okay.
There was no particulars mentioned, but
just
Salamanders,
who the
Primarch is, and I guess a little bit about what they did, what
fantastic.
they're known for.
Well, I guess last episode, both me and you were talking about how the Salamanders were our favorite loyalist legion. For you, it might be favorite legion in whole, from what I understand. And there's good reason for that. So yeah, let's talk about the Salamanders. So you were mentioning it last time. How much have you looked into the Salamanders and their Primarch and what they do?
Yeah, not much. I'm not even gonna lie. I read a little bit. I do know, out of everybody, they're the most human-esque. Where they don't just sacrifice people willy-nilly. So they seem to have more compassion for when they use regular humans that fight in the war.
Yeah, so that is absolutely true, and the reason they're that way is kind of interesting because it's multi-forked, right? So Salamanders. Let me open up my my notes page here. So you're absolutely right in your initial assessment. The Salamanders are renowned across the galaxy for being unusually concerned about innocent and civilian populations, and they have a lot more empathy and a lot more connection to humans and to the mankind as a whole than most Space Marine chapters do. That's mostly VulKan's fault. And so to understand what kind of makes the Space Marines, why do some not care about humans, and why do these ones care about humans, and what causes all of that jazz, you kind of have to understand what a Space Marine goes through in order to become a Space Marine, like how an aspirant becomes a Space Marine and what they do afterwards. And especially because of the video games, everybody is seeing Space Marines through a very, very particular lens. Like in Space Marine 2, we are seeing what Space Marines look like when you are a lieutenant in the Space Marines, as Lieutenant Titus is during the game, and what it's like when those Space Marines are actively engaged in a theater. That's a little bit different from what their day-to-day life kind of looks like when they're in between campaigns. And I say that very loosely because the Space Marines don't spend much time in between campaigns.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So here's the thing. When you take an aspirant, and every chapter of the thousands of chapters we have out there has a different method and different ways they go about doing it in order to try to get the right bits to make sure they have as successful a conversion as possible. We've talked a little bit about it in the last episode. Becoming a Space Marine is an excruciating and often lethal ordeal. You're talking about months-long surgeries and hormone injections and psychotherapy and organ implantation and cybernetics and all kinds of crazy shit.
Right.
Yeah. And so you take an aspirant when they're extraordinarily young. Most chapters will go between the ages of 8 and 11, 8 and 12 from a human population. Some vary from that. There are certain ones that recruit from gangs of hive worlds and stuff like that, but most will try to find between the ages of 8 and 10, 8 and 12.
Before puberty, huh?
Yeah, that's extraordinarily important. It's prepubescent. Now you can do it afterwards, but it's significantly more painful. It's more psychically traumatic, and it takes longer. And so if you catch them young, it works a lot more smoothly, and the indoctrination works more smoothly. And so they will take this individual, from the blood trials that they had, or from the whoever reached the mountain the fastest, or whatever they put in place. They will come down on their spaceships and they will abduct these people. Now, a lot of times they have it set up where this is like an honorable thing. And I'm going to reinforce the fact that Space Marines, by the vast majority of the Imperium, are not seen as super soldiers. They are seen as divine entities. They are seen as angels of the Emperor, which is why they go by the angels of death almost universally.
Well, one thing I would like to mention that I've read about this, that I have learned about 40K, is the reason people think like that, though, is because the Imperium prefers people to be more Stone Agey than educated. The main planet
Exactly
people
right.
are educated is Terra, which, if I'm not mistaken, is Earth.
Yes.
And all the worlds outside of that, they're very, very primitive. One, because they are more adapt to survive situations and different things. And two, probably the indoctrination.
So yeah, you're absolutely right. I guess I'm going to go through your checklist as I build up to the Salamander. So yes, Terra is Earth. It's also referred to as Sol 3, because we are the third planet away from the star Sol. But yeah, Holy Terra. It's where Big Daddy Emperor sits and the whole thing. Here's what you got to realize about Earth in the 40K, in the 41st millennium, right? Earth's population is around 10,000. That's
Yeah,
it.
I've read something crazy. Yeah.
You have the High Lords of Terra, their families, and the people that kind of maintain and work for the temples and the throne and the custodies and all that kind of jazz. I would be shocked to find out that even if you counted all the custodies and all the everything and all the servitors and all the whatever, maybe not the servitors, probably buttload of servitors, to find that the entire population of Earth is maybe 500,000. Maybe. To put it into perspective for you, the Emperor built the Golden Throne and the Emperor's Palace on Africa. That's it. All of Africa is his house.
Ooh, it's got to
Yeah.
be nice.
Like,
Good weather.
that's it. Now there are certain stories that talk about the 10,000 Space Marines that are in cryo underneath the Emperor's Palace, waiting for something to go wrong, and there's all kinds of shenanigans about that. But yeah. Anyway, so the idea that the Space Marines are angels does come from a willfully kind of ignorant population across the galaxy, right? But that's not necessarily just because of indoctrination. It's that way for two distinct reasons. First is the advent of the Imperial cult. Hats off. Thanks, Lorgar and the Word Bearers, for ruining the universe. And secondly, because all of mankind is terribly afraid of artificial intelligence. The universe is the way it is right now because of AI. We developed into a golden age of man. We had amazing technologies and everything was rocking and rolling. And we kind of went Skynet about it. Like, there was a series of rogue AIs that, if I remember correctly, were called the Men of Iron, that nearly wiped us out. And so now they were like, okay, there is a definite safe ceiling to technology. And so all technology is sacred, and understanding that technology is sacred, but trying to advance your technology is heresy. Congratulations. And they kill you for it.
Makes sense. I can see that.
And so, yeah, that whole mindset comes from a deep fear of artificial intelligence. Now, something to remember as a fan, I'm going to step kind of above the table here for just a second. A large part of this universe is going to reflect when it was written. And you got to remember, this is a 50-year-old game. Like, we're talking about a large part of their understanding of technology comes from like 1980 to 1984.
Just
And
look at
so,
Star Trek.
yeah, original series, yeah. And so their understanding of technology is very, I don't know how to put it. It reminds me a lot of the Alien franchise, where it's You have these very basic user interfaces, and they don't quite understand how it works, and it's all seen with this mysticism. And
Yes.
in 40K, it's that in the extreme. I actually had a friend of mine that talked about their favorite faction in the game was actually the Mechanicus, the Adeptus Mechanicus, which are the priesthood of Mars, right? Now, the priesthood of Mars is effectively a large population of engineers and mechanics that originally inhabited Mars as a kind of factory planet. They did research, they built the machines, they built the spaceships, that kind of thing. During the Dark Ages, while the Crusades were getting going and the Emperor was dealing with his stuff, Mars got largely isolated and was entirely closed off to any kind of interaction. And they went full xenophobic. And this buddy of mine said it makes perfect sense, because if you ever took a huge core of engineers, computer programmers, and techies and put them on a planet with no outside influence, this is how they would end up. And that's why the technology in the 40K universe works the way it does. That's why we have things like a machine spirit, and all technology seems kind of mystical and magical, is because it is. There is a machine spirit. You do have to perform the appropriate rites and chant the right rituals and burn the incense in order to make your computer work. Because
So weird.
it's how it works. Um, and I love the books where you talk about there are Imperial Guard, Astra Militarum, that they get assigned to like a tank crew, and then they have to be reassigned a week later because the tank didn't like them, because the
I've yet
machine
to get
spirit
to anything like that.
of the tank didn't like them, and so they were reassigned. And so if you start insulting the machine spirit of stuff, it will inexplicably begin to malfunction, or it will cease doing things, or it will act on its own accord. And when you really pay homage to the machine spirit, if you are connected to the machine spirit, you can even make your machines do these truly incredible things. There are stories of tank commanders that have caused their tank to make a last stand and fire off a round that wasn't ever loaded without anybody in the gunner seat, because they asked the machine spirit to do it as one last thing. And so, yeah, it's a whole wild ride.
So this is why people have always said you should talk nice to your stuff and make it work. Like when people used to talk to their
Yeah,
TVs and shit, it all came
exactly
from
right.
40K. So I'm gonna gather all of this is leading back to the why salamanders are slightly more human than everybody else.
Yes. So, understanding the way that everybody
The
kind of
world.
thinks in the universe, right, is crucial to understanding why the salamanders are different. Now, here's the thing. They are different in two distinct ways, and they are really going against the tradition in order to achieve that. So, let's go ahead and talk about the salamanders and VulKan and how it works into the fact that the mechanicum is the way they are and the machine spirit is the way it is and all that kind of jazz. So one thing everybody fails to mention to a lot of people that are trying to learn the lore is that the Primarchs, when they were created and they were lost, not all of them were lost. First off, I'm gonna dispel that illusion right now. The 20th Legion and the Alpha Legion did not get lost. They grew up on Terra, like Alpharius was ready to rock. Um, but the legions during the first founding were still raised without their Primarch. They were brought in, the gene seed was used, everything was ready to rock. It's just the Primarchs got stolen by chaos and scattered throughout everywhere. And so the Primarchs, the fathers of the legions, so to speak, were found by their legions in most cases. Now, the Salamanders were the 18th Legion. They, just like every other legion, were created in order to fulfill a purpose, right? The God Emperor had 20 legions, each raised with between 200 and 300,000 Marines for a purpose. And some of it was very basic, where it's like your job is to conquer alien controlled worlds, or your job is to quell insurrection in the population, and your job is to be shock and awe terror people like the Night Lords. The Salamanders Legion was raised with the distinct purpose of being the hero. They were created to be the opposite of Conrad Kurz and the Night Lords. Conrad Kurz was all about terror and shock and awe and pushing the enemy down through fear, and his legion followed that. Salamanders are the inverse about that. They are the people that make people rise up, that make them want to fight back, that get them hyped, and they are the heroes that lead the charge. VulKan ended up on a planet called Nocturne, and Nocturne is just, it's a miserable, terrible place. Its atmosphere is so constantly baked by radiation from the local star system that it causes the entire population to mutate. Now, it's in a way that the Imperium finds acceptable, falling into kind of an abhuman kind of way. They're not like heretics to be burned, right? But they
That's
mutate.
good.
Yeah.
Upsides.
Upsides. This is immediately noticeable because their skin is not just coal night black. It's also metallic. It has metallic or organic steel threads that work through the skin. And their eyes are blood red, and it's all because of the radiation. Jimmy Bones has joined us. You stepped on just as I'm talking about Nocturne, my friend.
Nice.
So this is the planet where VulKan landed. Now, here's the thing. Every Primarch that was stolen ended up not just on a planet and being raised by that planet's environment, but also ultimately conquering that world and becoming like its solitary ruler in almost every case. There are exceptions. Alpharius obviously didn't conquer anything because he never got stolen. And in certain people's ways, kind of like Conrad Kurz, you didn't end up ruling it through any kind of political means. You're just really evil Batman. Yeah. That we'll talk about Kurz later. The reason he comes up is because he's the exact opposite of VulKan. But so VulKan ends up on Nocturne. He undergoes the same mutations that everybody else undergoes on Nocturne. He has jet black coal skin with metallic, organic steel fibers that run through it. And his eyes are pure red, glowing red. And Nocturne is relevant because it never gets to see the sky. It never has any daylight or sunshine or anything. It's a constant night and constantly bathed in this radiation. And because of that, the people of Nocturne have learned to really develop a social symbiosis with one another, this social structure that is very much it takes a village mindset. Everybody helps with everything. And your family and your family's friends and anybody connected to them are directly your responsibility as you are directly their responsibility. And so everybody's very cooperatively minded. More so than that, they value life because, as you can imagine, in a hellscape, having babies and getting a big family is really hard to do. And so you end up with this scenario where VulKan is raised being taught that your family and the ones you're connected to are everything. And he's already supposed to be leading a legion that is supposed to be the people's hero. So this worked out wonderfully. And that's where you kind of get the mindset of the Salamanders, is those key elements. I don't want to spend too much time here because we could do an entire episode on just VulKan. I highly recommend reading the books. But yeah, VulKan is unique, not just in the fact that he's considered like the softest hearted one. He's the epitome of a strong man takes care of himself, a stronger man takes care of his neighbors. He is physically the most powerful Primarch out of all 18 of them. He's taller, he's stronger, and he's constantly having to hold back with the other Primarchs when they're doing things like sparring. But all of that is tempered by this idea that he's going to be a hero of the people. He cares about his populations. And as soon as he learned he was an angel of the Imperium, so to speak, suddenly all of the Imperium were connected to him, and they are his responsibility.
Damn. So yeah, we were just talking about fan questions. So one of them was Salamander. So we talked a little bit about becoming a Space Marine and how it sucks your humanity out of you, and then which led to the current discussion of VulKan and the Salamander.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's exactly right. So when you have man, there's so many little key details that it makes my brain kind of jump from topic to topic a little. So in the early days, during the legions, right, where you had the 18 legions of Space Marines, again, bear in mind they were between 200 and 300,000 Marines. I believe in each legion. I could be wrong about the number, might be in total, but yeah. And the Salamanders were so focused on, minimize civilian casualties, protect the population, inspire them to rise up, that they ran into a conflict, because the more they inspired people to rise up and defend planets, the more that these people were put into harm's way, and the more they had to continuously intervene. And they became very, very renowned for never giving up. They never backed down. Now, it's not an uncommon trait amongst Space Marines, but the Salamanders did it in a way that you continuously watch them lose in a war of attrition. They would succeed. They would never back down. They wouldn't give up, but they would lose 2, 3, 4, 5 times as many soldiers as other legions would because of their battle methods. And it ended up really costing them by the time the Horus Heresy came back around. So yeah, those are kind of the big arcing deals that you need to know, is that not only is VulKan a hero figure, he was designed to be a hero figure. His legion was designed to be this empowering, inspire heroes force, and it's nearly led to their extinction multiple times. And so everything you see on like TikTok and Facebook and stuff that talks about how, yes, the salamanders protect the people and they will safeguard a single child even to their own self-sacrifice, is true to their detriment.
Fun fact about salamanders too: most of the rest of the Imperium are not aware that they are, glowing red-eyed, dark-skinned.
That is true.
Human adjacent, right? Like it's actually caused more than once a bit of a conflict between other Space Marines, even.
Yeah, even amongst the Primarchs themselves. Like it was a huge thing.
I did not know that.
There have been several inquisitorial like junctions put on them. Their fortress monastery is on Nocturnian, which is the moon of Nocturne. That has been constantly under surveillance and observation. Like it's a whole thing. Yeah, Bones is absolutely correct.
And what side did they pick during the Horus Heresy thing?
They are loyalists, hardcore.
They are loyalists. So here's the thing about the Horus Heresy. When you're dealing with that particular civil war, the reason it was the largest kind of storytelling zone in the game is because at the time, the Emperor raised these legions to conquer the galaxy. He wanted the galaxy. That was their job. And they each did it in their own particular way. And he had long-term plans for each of them. They weren't just an invading force and soldiers to be used and then forgotten about. They were going to be used in certain roles throughout foreseeable history, as far as he knew. What he didn't count on was how good he made his soldiers at killing each other. Their armor did not stop their weapons. They knew each other's tactics because they'd each been trained the exact same way. Like the slaughter that was coming down was, in most people's eyes, a literal like battle of angels in the heavens outside their understanding. And when it came down to what VulKan was doing during the Horus Heresy, VulKan himself, okay, so key detail you have to understand about VulKan. Every Primarch had something a little goofy, a little unique about them, right? Some of them were quite obvious. Sanguinius and his wings, for example. And everybody talks about how Sanguinius had big angel wings, and nobody talks about the fact that he was also completely addicted to eating people, as is the rest of his chapter. So
what's
a Space
his chapter?
Marine, the Blood Angels.
Okay, go ahead.
Now, Sanguinius he was killed during the Horus Heresy in a really bad way that ended up breaking his entire chapter forever.
Well, I mean, it wasn't that he was killed in a bad way. He was just killed, and he had, because Sanguinius's whole thing is when he came back to his chapter, he's such a strong psyker that he had like a mystical connection basically with all of his seed children, like with all of his brothers that were made from his gene seed. He had a psychic connection with, and so when he died, it broke the rest of them in a kind of fundamental way. It cursed them in essence.
Yeah.
Oh wow.
So
that's
yeah,
pretty neat.
we can talk about the Red Thirst and the Black Rage and stuff on another episode, but the reason I bring it up is because, again, every Primarch has something. Now, in broad scope, you can categorize a lot of these things into psychic fields, like Bone was talking about. Nearly every Primarch has a field of energy around them at all times that they don't control, or
Except
in
for
some cases aren't
Taurus.
even aware of. Well, yeah. That what this field does is it inspires and sometimes bends the will of those around them. In the case of certain people like Gilliman, this can be a loyalty and discipline inspiring aura where people want to listen to you. They see you as the big dick in charge, that you're the smartest person in the room, and they do what you say. Vulcan's is different. Vulcan's is basically makes people listen to what's the song that's been all over TikTok from Deadpool and Wolverine, the Like a Prayer choir version that Madonna did. It's basically blasts that into the back of your brain, so you're constantly like getting hyped up and inspires action, right? You combine that with the fact that Vulcan's the only Primarch that inherited the Emperor's perpetualism. Vulcan is a perpetual. So while every Primarch is effectively immortal, Vulcan's literally immortal. You can't kill it. You could atomize him down to dust and he will just appear back out of nothing. He's that kind of immortal. And his healing factor is not just incredible, but gets better over time.
Jeez.
Yeah, so the longer he stays alive, the harder it is to kill him, even though it's impossible to begin with. And so, as a perpetual, he was never hesitant in this kind of attrition lifestyle. Everything he endured made him stronger and smarter, and his aura made sure everybody around him wanted to go too. And so, yeah, that was kind of his weirdness. So not only does he look unusual and have an unusual mindset, but he's unique amongst his brothers because he's immortal. And this kind of leads back up to where we get to the modern day salamanders, right? So during the Horus Heresy, the salamanders had taxed themselves so severely that by the time the Great Betrayal was done and Isfahan 3 happened and everything was done, there were less than 700 total salamanders. By the time the Horus Heresy was over and Gilliman set down the codex and broke everybody up into chapters, the salamanders had to get an exception because they couldn't divide their numbers. I believe at that point they were down to maybe over 300 people, not even enough to form the 1,000 that they needed for a single chapter. And so for millennia, there was no successor chapters to the salamanders. They did not have children. They did not have anything. There's some talks about the black dragons being salamanders and that kind of stuff, but they didn't have anything. They didn't have any successors. And Vulcan, by the end of everything, said, "What we have done is done," something to that effect. And he took his badass teleporting hammer and he said, "I'll come back when you need me," and galloped off into the galaxy, never to be seen again.
No, he's seen again. He came back for
There
another
was
war.
Return of Vulcan.
Yeah, he came back,
Was there a
and then
second war?
and then he died.
Heavy air quotes.
He was killed.
So he came back once
but-
after Horus Heresy and then left
Yeah,
again.
he specifically when he came back, I can't remember what the war he came back for was called.
I'm
he came
trying
back,
to look it up right now.
maybe one of the Black Crusades, maybe could be. But he literally came back, and he made sure to specify when he was back that this isn't what I was talking about when he was like, "I will come back for the apocalypse," essentially.
Yeah.
So it's assumed that he's going to be back again.
Interesting. I didn't even know that he had come back once. That's something new for me. I'm learning stuff myself here. So he left a few of his tools behind, right? Like you have the artifacts of Vulcan that are heavily regarded. When he left, you have his spear, which has a name.
That's actually that's actually what people believe by and large, is that if they gather the 8 items or artifacts of Vulcan, that is when he will return.
Come back.
Yeah.
So here's the short of it, Eric, just so you have something to grasp onto. Vulcan is basically Thanos from the MCU if he was a good guy. Like,
I mean, technically speaking, Thanos, was he good? Was he bad in the movie? Was he,
And so if you have a Thanos that desperately wants to keep the entire population of the universe alive, that's kind of what you have with Vulcan. And yeah, there's like 8 or 9 artifacts. If you bring them together, you get to make a Dragon Ball wish and bring Vulcan back and that kind of stuff.
Let me ask. I want to ask Bones something real quick. Your take on this, Bones? So with the Salamanders being the most human, like humanity-based founding, and taking the worst losses and things like that, do you think that kind of shows that like humanity equals death? Like in the sense of, like, is it a weakness? Like, is having humanity like a downside in this 40K style universe?
Almost certainly, it is a weakness. I mean, it's not necessarily a
Yeah,
bad thing, but
absolutely.
it is definitely a weakness.
Well, and it's weird because it gives you a reason to fight, right? Like you have something to protect and something to value, but it's a vulnerability. And this is going to get into like a Socrates style like philosophical debate.
I don't know who that is.
Okay, so this is the idea of like one should never have a family because it gives something for somebody else to attack to hurt you, right? But if you don't have a family to fight for, if you don't have brothers to fight for, what do you do with your life? Like, what value are you?
Then you become a word
So
bearer.
yeah, then you become a word bearer. Boy, did I rant about Lorgar and the word bearers earlier, Bones. um, yeah. So
I still
that's kind.
maintain Lorgar was the main reason we even had the heresy.
Oh, 100%. I do not contest that at all. When Travis comes back to us after his sabbatical, he'll be able to tell you I have raged, full on rage after finishing certain books about Lorgar and that piece of shit. Like, God, I hate him. I hate him so much.
All because he couldn't get Daddy's attention.
Yeah, that's exactly right. He didn't get hugged enough. Man. So any case, here is the big deal. There are two different ways you get more Space Marines. We talked about one last episode, right? The progenoid gland. You can pull out a seed, put it in somebody else, and over the course of several weeks of bad surgery and psycho indoctrination, where you literally lose all of your old personality and memories, except for a few echoes here and there, you get another Space Marine. That's a 1-to-1 ratio. What we didn't discuss are what's known as the foundings. Now, the foundings, how many foundings has there been, Bones? 12? I don't know, several. Foundings happen when the Empire decides it needs more Space Marines. Now, there's an upside and a downside to this. The upside is you get more Space Marines. The downside is you can't do a small batch. They can't just like make 100 Space Marines. The process that they have is the same one the Emperor used. So you get tens of thousands of Marines all at once. Like there are whole chapters that are just crank it out. And that's where we get to like the Black Templars for second founding. They are born of Rogel Dorn's gene seed, and just the entire chapter got chunked right into existence. And there's been several foundings of those throughout the millennia that have helped, and that's where we get suspected successors of the Salamanders. But there wasn't supposed to be like a reserve of gene seed from them. That was the whole problem, is that they had worn themselves down to nothing. That is up until the Ultima founding. And this is where we get to modern day 40K. Because the Ultima founding came out with the Primaris Marines, and here was, 1,000 Primaris Marines for the Salamanders, and several Salamander descendant chapters, like the Black Vipers, like the Storm Giants, the Covenant of Fire, the Black Kraken, Dark Krakens, Black Krakens, Dark Krakens. Hold on, I have a list here. Yeah, Black Vipers, Covenant of Fire, Dark Krakens, the Dragon Spears, and the Iron Drakes are all now successor chapters of the Salamanders. Some of them confirmed, some of them are suspected. Again, like the Storm Giants and the Black Vipers are kind of more of just we think. And Black Dragons. Black Vipers, they know, but the Black Vipers are weird. And so when they learned about this, the Salamanders were ecstatic. Like, we're saved! We are no longer an endangered species! Huzzah! And so they sent chaplains out to each of these successor chapters to basically meet and greet them and make sure they understood the rules of the cult of the Prometheum and like how the Salamanders did things. Most of those chaplains did not come home. Yeah, and the reason I bring that up is because I really want to hammer through, if you have Salamanders with what a Salamander can do, and they are not controlled by a rigorous understanding and value of life, they become real big problems.
I think the Ultima founding is the 27th founding.
27th?
Oh
Wow.
Yeah.
So yeah, bunch of Space Marines.
I mean, they die a lot, so
Yeah. There's
We
plenty
gotta
of
make
room,
more.
right? Well, and here's the thing. Sometimes Space Marine chapters are used very widely. I mean, you look at the Ultramarines. They are all over I believe the Pacifica Segmentum and most of the Galactic South. They're everywhere, right? Then you have entire chapters of Space Marines that are like, your job as Space Marines is to guard the Gilead system, and that's all they do. And so it's a wildly like unfair bouncing needle style system. So we could get into VulKan and his war gear and that kind of stuff, but in order to keep it kind of overarching, that's what you're looking at with the Salamanders. You have the most terrifying, the most scary looking, some of the most powerful Space Marines in all of 40K. But they love you too much to just die. And so you do end up with this kind of dichotomy. And I personally hold that the Salamanders are kind of like we talked about before the show, Eric, kind of like Gabriel Lorcan of the Luna Wolves. They're kind of good guys in the 40K universe. Not all of them, and definitely not their successors. But for the most part, you do have this one little beacon that's supposed to be the good guys. They're the heroes. Now, their iconography is all fire and dragon scales. They have a distinct love for Promethium, Napalm, and Melta, and they are absolutely terrifying. These are a fire-driven, unto the anvil of war chapter. And so when I tell you that they do value mankind and they are loving in the extreme to mankind, it comes with all of the downside of that too, because if you stand in their way or you are endangering mankind, they are terribly brutal people that really like to burn you while you're alive.
Straight to the point. Yes. I like it.
And so, yeah, I think VulKan's probably my favorite character in the Horus Heresy, including Alfarius, which is also one of my favorites, but I think VulKan's a little bit more...
You mean Omegon?
He's just... Oh, man, well, I need to do Alpha Legion so bad.
I like Lorcan, only because I just started reading the book.
So, yeah, we had two other questions revolving around Lorcan, the Luna Wolves, and we did have one I want to cover really quick because it's a simple one and we can write it off. Before I move on, if anybody has anything about the Salamanders they want to hear more about, if you would like an episode dedicated to the Salamanders, this is really something I can talk about for a very long time. I mean, here we are, we're almost 40 minutes into our recording session. I'm still on Salamanders, so it's quite easy. So just hit us up, do all that fun algorithm stuff, give us a comment, give us a like, tell your friends, tell them to bitch at us about it, and we'll get you an episode all about Salamanders. So there was a question about purity seals. Fortunately, this one's going to be quick. A purity seal is red wax in a piece of paper, usually with like prayers and litanies and stuff on it, that has been affixed to armor or a weapon, showing that that device or the individual carrying it is free from the taint of chaos and heresy and has sworn an oath to do a thing. That's what they're for. And you'll find sometimes a Space Marine will bear 3, 4, or 5 of these, one on his bolter, one on his chainsword, one on his armor, one on his power pack. It's just showing that he is free of the taint of chaos and has vowed his oath to mankind.
Some of them super long, though. Like I saw one in the game, like it's all around the dude's like arm. I was like, holy shit, dude.
So, yeah, when it comes to the litanies that are used to... bear in mind, we've been talking a lot about the Horus Heresy. This advent of litanies like he's talking about, listeners, comes from 10,000 years later when the universe is so steeped in the god emperor's cult of the Imperium that religion is their life. So there are several different forms of prayer and litany that can be very long-winded, and the longer, more specific, and more powerful the litany is, I mean, the more it's supposed to work. And so you do end up, especially amongst the chaplains and the executioners, where you have these incredibly detailed prayers that will wrap around and around them. Some of them will wrap around the torso. Others will actually tattoo it into their skin. It's a whole thing. But yeah, that's what they're for. They don't have any inherent power unto themselves. They kind of invoke some of the God Emperor's miracles, and they're seen as a reflection to those around them that the bearer of this seal is free of the taint of chaos, and that's what they do.
There might be other. They're also like sometimes bestowed by chaplains onto somebody for like a specific blessing for something that they did or something like that as well.
Yeah, it could be kind of like a badge of honor kind of thing.
Nifty.
Indeed. So, let's talk about the Luna Wolves.
One sec, before you do that, what was the other one? I sent it to you. before we do
Oh.
Luna Wolves.
Okay, yeah. We also wanted to talk about the Dark Prince Slanesh. That was one of the questions we got from last episode. Okay, I'm gonna bear in mind that asking about one of the big four chaos gods is an entire thing. Like, trying to fit that into a small video is nearly impossible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a little bit of a primer to capitalize on last episode. If you want our initial impressions of the Dark Prince of Chaos, it was in the last episode. Fantastic. Now let's get a little more specific. So Slanesh, the Dark Prince of Chaos, the Lady of Excess, the Prince of whatever list of titles they have. This is the youngest and probably one of the most influential chaos gods out there. They were effectively born, heavy air quotes, because the space elves had too much sex. So, yeah. So
The
the
space elves,
Eldari,
yeah, they had a utopian society. They had nothing to worry about. They just were completely excessive. Everything they did, they just partied nonstop because
yeah,
their society was
you're
too perfect.
you're talking about a race of incredibly psychically charged space elves that had developed a perfect utopia. Nobody wanted for anything. They had so much they didn't know what to do with it. They had a perfect utopia, and so the only thing they had to do was find new limits. And this came in the form of every kind of partying that you can imagine, right? Like, secret societies developed, they developed new recreational drugs, they created psychic connections amongst whole populations so that everyone could not just feel the same stimulations but feel it amplified 10,000 times. And the like, they partied in the extreme for years
Respect.
on end. And because of the levels of excess that they went to, because of the levels of not just excess but hubris that they had, ultimately they psychically gave birth to a new primal chaos deity. Now bear in mind, this was eons ago. You're talking about like near the beginning of time, because the Eldari were already old by the time the humans were walking around with fur on them. And so before we ever as a species got involved, they gave birth to this deity. Now, let me see if I got a list of like titles and stuff. There's a whole thing about Slanesh. Yeah, the Dark Prince, the Prince of Pleasure, the Lady of Excess, the Perfect Prime, the Prince of Chaos, the Master of Excess in all things, and known as She Who Thirsts, or let me see if I can say this in Eldari, Silantresh. Their whole thing is stimulation, and usually in the extreme, right? Now, when Slanesh was born, the Eldari, who, as I remind you, had a utopia, perfect society, they died. Like, all of them. So Slanesh ate their souls. That's the whole thing. That's what she does, is she eats souls. And when she was born, the Eldari paid the price for that. It ended up splitting the
Damn.
Eldari into two distinct groups, Craft World Eldar and the Dark Eldar. And they ended up surviving as an extraordinarily endangered species through different methods. So, the Eldar, the Craft World Eldar, built their own planet, hence Craft World, and they put their souls in a jar. It's called a soul gem. They took their souls out of their body, put it in a stone, and that's who they are now. And when you affix that stone to a synthetic, usually false body, you get to have that body. They can still make more bodies, but they don't have any souls in them. And so when a new Eldar is born, they put a soul gem on them, and you are effectively reincarnated into this infant body. Dark Eldar just embraced being soulless. They lost their soul and everything that entails, and instead now survive through perpetual cloning, very like Star Wars-esque, huge vats of cloning Eldar. And so they are dead. They don't have a soul, but they keep making new bodies. So, hurrah. Additionally, because of the void of their soul, they act as kind of a conduit where they bring energy in the same way that Slanesh took energy out of them. They're like a void. And so they become empowered by inflicting trauma on others, because that psychic feedback feeds them and can keep a clone fresh and young for a long time.
Also, Slanesh is actually really young in terms of the other, like in terms even of mankind. Slanesh didn't awaken until the 30th millennium.
Oh, I thought
It was
it was still like,
the age of
it,
strife was the fall of the Eldari.
oh, I thought it was still like when we were monkeys.
No,
Am I
no,
wrong about that?
Wow.
Oh, so she's very, very young. Like, she's younger than the Emperor young. Interesting. That I didn't know. Good catch, Bones. Well done.
So is she the one that convinced the one nobody likes, the Primarch nobody likes, to
no.
start turning to chaos?
Lorgar? No.
She
It wasn't even a
turned.
chaos god
Yeah.
that convinced Lorgar to do that.
No,
It was a human.
it was his friend, his advisors.
Yeah.
They're
Like,
like, they're like, hey, the emperor won't let you worship him, but there's some other people that are really into it. And he was like, cool.
yeah,
Jeez.
like, man.
Okay, so in regards to her, is she in charge of like one of the chaos armies, like in the sense
Yes.
of like
She has her own domain of delight. She has manifested her own demons. I say she. It's everything. It's all of them. So they, to
And
pronoun appropriately, I guess.
who's it?
Um,
Fulgrim, I think, right? Is the
Yeah, the Emperor's
Demon
Children
Prince
guy. Yeah.
of Slanesh?
Is it Fulcrum?
I think it's Fulgrim.
That sounds right.
He's the pretty boy one, right?
Yeah. So effectively, there is an entire chapter of Chaos Space Marines during the heresy that fell to Slanesh's influence because they were all about perfection. They like not just in combat, but like they immaculately polished their armor. They were extremely vain. The way that they fought was more of a watch me go through this pattern than it was any kind of like something else. They were all about perfection. And so Slanesh got in real easy with them. And yeah, they became I guess they've always been the Emperor's Children. They still maintain the title of the Emperor's Children, even though they worship a giant snake thing.
everyone makes choices.
Yeah. Slanesh is kind of known in the game for two different things. She's a fairly talented psyker, usually through buffing and that kind of stuff, but she's all about speed. And so teleportation and mad dashes across the battlefield and flickering in troops, and her demons are not considered very resilient, but they will hit you hard, they will hit you fast, and they will hit you like 50 times. It's their whole thing.
They can't take a hit.
Yeah, they're a little squishy. They're not really known for their resilience. There are exceptions, naturally, but yeah, not well known for the exceptions. What are the greater demons, Bones, called of Slanesh? What are they called?
I don't remember off the top of my
Keepers
head.
of Secrets. So yeah, the is it Keepers of Secrets?
I thought Keepers of Secrets was
That might be a Zinch thing.
I think it was Zinch.
No,
So
yeah,
greater-
it's a Slanesh greater demon.
Just sexy
So
secrets,
she has
I guess.
greater demons?
So
They all
every
have
demon
greater-
god has greater demons that are kind of manifests avatars of theirs. It's a whole thing.
Lords of Change.
Yeah, Lords of Change.
All right, and last one about Slanesh. Does she, like, for her Space Marines that she has control of, does she help them create more Space Marines, or do they still do it the other way?
Oh, so recruitment for the Chaos Space Marines. Oh dear. No, she doesn't help. The Chaos Gods don't help ever with anything. That's not what they do. Every Chaos Warband recruits differently, and it is not. To speak about it too in depth would be in breach of terms of service. I'll put it to you like that. Know that the way they do it is pretty much the same way that normal Space Marines do it. They just do it the hard way. A lot more violence, a lot more forcing it, kind of thing.
Unless you're a Black Legion, and then they're just like, yeah, anybody can come.
Yeah. Well, and Alpha Legion, who just convince Tithe Worlds that they're the good guys, and we get our aspirants from their pool. But yeah, so the Black Legion is a whole different thing. That was effectively what happened with Horus's Legion, and after Abaddon took over, and Abaddon changed the rules and said, you don't have to be a son of Horus to be in the Black Legion. Anybody can join. Just sign up.
In fact, sometimes they beat people. They're like, now you're a Black Legionary.
Yeah, welcome to the team.
And if you don't want to, well, you are. So that's your choice.
And bear in mind, when it comes to the Chaos Space Marines, there are whole sections that don't actually worship Chaos. We talked about Conrad Kurz earlier, who leads the Night Lords. They don't worship Chaos. They don't do anything with Chaos.
They just hate the Imperium.
Yeah, they just hate the Empire. The Scarlet Corsairs are the same way.
The Black Legion doesn't really, Abaddon specifically doesn't bow to
Yeah,
any of the Chaos Gods.
he'll use demons and stuff, but he
Yeah,
doesn't
I mean,
worship
well,
anything.
he uses Chaos, but that's his whole thing.
Yeah.
Is he doesn't let Chaos use him. He uses Chaos, or so he says.
Yeah, and that's the grand delusion, right? Is anybody that uses chaos thinks they're in charge. The Alpha Legion's the same way, where there are whole sections where it's like, yeah, of course we use Xenos tech, and yeah, we learned warp magic because sorcery is super useful. But don't worry, we're in charge of it. And it's like, okay, bro. So yeah, that'll lead us actually into the Luna Wolves. We also, I believe, somebody brought up Luna Wolves. We talked about it before the show.
Travis did, of course, because he's not
Oh, it
here.
was Travis, yeah. So the short of it is that the Luna Wolves was Horus's warband before they became the Sons of Horus.
Yeah, I can give you a quick backstory. Luna Wolves were, before they recovered Horus, they were the Luna Wolves. They recovered Horus. Horus was the only Primarch for 30 years, and he he was also already like the favored son of the Emperor. And so, you are the one chapter with a Primarch for 30 years. They got kind of, full of themselves already. But the Emperor specifically told Horus to rename his new legion after he had, kind of proven themselves worthy. Which he didn't want to at the time, but he finally agreed to, and then he named them the Sons of Horus. Yeah, that's
yeah,
right.
the Sons of Horus. So the Luna Wolves featured dominantly in some of the early novels of the Horus Heresy. And there are several really cool characters, Lorcan being one of them, that I think are excellent characters in the story. And you'll find a bunch of the Luna Wolves and later the Sons of Horus that, again, they didn't like what Horus had become after he became corrupted and mind controlled by chaos. And so here's the thing. You've heard me bitch about Lorgar a bunch, right? Horus, who is the big bad guy of the Horus Heresy, they named it after him, after all. He wasn't a bad guy. He was trying to do good. He was a good space marine and a good Primarch. He treated his legion well. He valued human life to a certain extent. He was a good guy. But he got corrupted by the Chaos Gods because they saw him as a tool to get at the Emperor. Effectively, he had lost all free will by the time the Horus Heresy went full bore. Lorgar didn't have that problem. He was just a bitch. He could have just been a good guy. And
I wouldn't say that
been done
Horus
with
had lost free will. He had just been greatly deceived.
Yeah, it's probably a better
He thought that
way
he
to
was
describe
doing
it.
the right thing, even he was just greatly misguided. Whereas, yeah, Lorgar was like, oh, I was like, he's just an asshole. Like,
Yeah.
So we hate Logar here.
Yeah.
That's
Lorgar and the Word Bearers, man. For those of you that play Word Bearers out there, more power to you. I'm glad you enjoy your faction. I don't get it, but I don't have to. So, man, do I hate the Word Bearers so much. And you know what the most annoying part is? They get all the cool rules in the Chaos Space Marine Codex. So yeah, that kind of covers our big questions. The Salamanders are effectively the heroes of mankind. I covered what purity seals were, and we talked about the Luna Wolves. The Luna Wolves there's quite a bit of lore about them, but that's really it in a nutshell. They're based on the moon, and they were Horus's legion before they became the Sons of Horus.
And then they lost the Horus Heresy, and then Abaddon took over, and then he renamed them the Black Legion, and he said Horus was a pussy.
Yep, that's that's exactly right. I believe the exact quote is, "We are no longer beholden to his failures."
You want to know fun fact about the Word Bearers though, is when the Black Legion and the Chaos, they all began their return, they're getting ready to come back from the warp the first time, and they have this warp witch contacts them and tells them that the Emperor is now being worshipped as a god. They all chuckle at the fact that the Word Bearers were right. They're like the Word Bearers were they're like, I can't remember what he said, but they're talking shit on them. They're like, they're scum. They fucking eat dirt. They're the worst. But they still won.
Yeah.
because that was their whole thing. Was the Emperor didn't want to be a god; they wanted the Emperor to be their god.
Yep.
Oh, okay.
No, that's exactly right. Yeah, like, um, realistically, the entirety of the Horus Heresy, the reason the Emperor failed, what happened to Magnus the Red, the destruction of the Webway, the invasion of Terra, all of it is Lorgar's fault.
Yeah, Magnus,
All of
We
it.
man,
blame you, Logar.
Thousand Sons is a freaking like super sad
That's a
story.
sad story. Like, man, we'll have to do an episode on Magnus the Red
Don't-
and Thousand Sons.
Don't tell me about it. I'm slowly reading the books. Whenever I poop, I read. So,
So yeah, I did want to take a quick minute as we're wrapping up here, guys, to remind you all, if you've made it this far into the episode, obviously you're enjoying what you're listening to. Be sure and do all that fun algorithm stuff. We here at Crossing the Nerdverse are beholden to the almighty algorithm. So give us a like, give us a share, comment on the video, let us know what you want to hear about. I know that there is talk right now about actually talking the crunchy side of Warhammer, doing something about like the games, the RPGs, the books, and ultimately a way to get into the fandom, because it is a complicated fandom. It's complex, it's deep, and it's old.
we definitely need to talk about the miniatures, just because I think it's difficult to get into if you don't know anybody. Like where I'm at, I don't have an easy resource to it, so I find it slightly difficult to learn it all on my own, like what I need, what I don't need, and stuff like that. So yeah, it'd be great to do that next episode.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty good way to go.
What you need is a 3D printer. I'm just kidding.
I've heard that.
It's actually not
that is
easy.
a major divisive role right now, because printed minis, there are a lot of players out there, including some of my personal friends, that feel very strongly that you should not be printing Warhammer minis.
I mean, honestly, there's not that many good FTL files for Warhammer, probably
Yeah.
because GW is,
I
probably,
think
GW has its problems.
I think the best thing you should do is print like buildings or scenery
yeah.
stuff,
That's
not the miniatures themselves. Like I bought a bunch of craft stuff to make things with my kid, so
Oh,
we're
yeah.
actually going to craft them. Last thing though, very curious to get people's opinions on this. So this is a giant nerdverse question.
Oh.
As you've noticed throughout a lot of the nerdverse, colors is a huge thing. Like everyone's got a favorite Power Ranger. They all like color coded. Sonic characters are all color coded. Space Marines are all color coded. So do either one of you, and I'll tell you mine after you answer, do either one of you ever lean towards something because of a color instead of the overall actual abilities / personalities or anything like that? We'll start with Bones, and then we'll get to Ryan, and then myself.
For me, I don't think so. I mean, I do like the color purple. It's always been my favorite color. So I do kind of go towards like purple things, but like, really, I prefer the lore for deciding what I like inside of the nerdverse in general.
So I'm actually in a very similar boat. My favorite color is also purple. Me and Bones belong to the same gaming club. That's our gaming club's color. Even like, it's been my favorite color for many years. And so I will admit that I get drawn to things that are purple, especially things that mix purple and black or purple and silver, more readily. But more so than getting drawn to colors, there are times where I have leaned away from things because of color. For example, I'm not a huge fan of the Imperial Fists. Not because I don't like Rogel Dorn, or I think that they're a bad chapter, or there's anything bad about them. I think they're really cool, actually. It's because they have yellow armor, and I can't stand it. So yeah, that's a whole thing. In fact, one of the first armies I ever put together. Okay, so the thing to understand is whenever I put my armies together, I like to have a headcanon, right? That's why I made the joke about this is Crossing Nerdverse, we are on the grand ship fandom with our big forward-facing weapon, the headcanon. Because I like having a headcanon in regards to why I do certain things and how I do certain things. So I won't buy a model unless it makes sense. And the first Space Marine army I ever put together was originally based off of the smallest little section of a paragraph that was in the 40K rulebook at the time. I think it was 8th, but don't quote me on that. I finally decided to bite the bullet and I'm going to make Space Marines because there was a chapter in there called the Blood Ravens. And they talked about how this chapter had a extraordinary amount of librarians in it. They were very psychically oriented, and they were all mysterious and didn't know their own past, and they valued knowledge. And I was like, man, that looks super cool. And I hesitated forever putting them together because they're red. It's not that I have a problem with red. I think red's a fine color. But our buddy Robbie at the time was playing Blood Angels, who are red. And so I almost didn't put that army together because I didn't want to paint another red Space Marine army.
Yeah, Ryan hates being the same as somebody else.
It's I don't even know how to explain it. Like, it just bothers me.
So I have definitely, personally, I do lean towards things that are red. I've always been a big red person, and it's funny because when I joined the army and became artillery, artillery's color is red. I did not obviously know when I joined, but I do find the more I look at it, like I sort of like things that are green though, but I don't like the color. So like
Okay.
I'm a big like green Power Ranger fan. Same thing, salamanders. So the nice thing with 40K that you can do that you probably shouldn't do is I paint mine red. So like I make
there
a
you go.
red. I make my armor red, and then I just put the emblem I want on it.
So let me interject here because this is super important, and I want this to be hammered through in our 40K month here. GW, Citadel Miniatures want you to come up with your own shit. They want you to write your stories. They want it to be personal. There used to be entire magazines dedicated to how to convert for vehicles in the game and how to create models from stuff you had around the house. The original reason and the lore that they've written to kind of wrap around that is very, very interesting. But the original reason the 2nd and 11th Legions were left blank with the Lost Founding was so that there were empty spots in the Space Marine lore for you to add your own shit. The reason that the successor chapter organization exists is so that you can want to play salamanders but have them in red armor.
and
That's
I will.
I mean,
Like,
yeah,
I think that's cool. I think you should come up with a cool name and a cool emblem and write your own shit for a successor chapter of the salamanders that are red.
yeah. There's
In
20.
fact, there is one. The cult of the Council of Fire. What the hell is the name?
The Tyrannosaurs are like red and black, I think.
Yeah, like, you should do that. And so don't just have red salamanders, write story for it and make it something. Here's the thing. So many times has a fan-made thing become so popular that it gets added to the universe that it's something that you should be encouraged to do. One of the Salamander Primaris successor chapters, the Dark Krakens, started off as a homebrew on a subreddit. Now it's in the rulebooks, and they're in part of the canon. Even though GW itself is famous for saying there is no canon, like there just isn't any. Stop worrying about it.
Just so everybody does know on the Warhammer front, real quick, there is a huge sale, Humble Bumble, where you can get like a ridiculously large amount of books for like less than $20, I think it is.
Ooh,
And Humble
nice.
Bumble was something about like they raise money for things. Now these books that you're getting are all single, if I remember right, are all just like small storylines. It's not like you can't get. It's not like Horus Heresy, all the books to that or anything like that. It's all like stories written in the universe. So just to throw that out, I don't get anything from this. I'm not affiliated with Humble Bumble. But if you are looking for some lore things and seeing like the smaller scale stories, it's a super affordable way to do it. And
Absolutely.
I might even throw the link in our YouTube.
Yeah, we should throw down some incoming support on that one because there is a Black Library book bundle. It's 24 books, and these are good stuff. You have Spear of the Emperor is in here, which was another. Spear of the Emperor is a perfect example. Ha ha ha. That was a fan-made chapter. Like, they came out of nowhere. They're fan-made, and now they have a novel about them that is official and in the canon, so to speak. This bundle's fantastic. For those of you that are interested in VulKan and the Salamanders, Nick Kime's Fire Drake is in here. They have something for nearly everybody. I have the Medusas in here. Salamanders
so-
in here.
A lot of people, to include ourselves, have definitely taken advantage of the Space Marines 2 game. And the joy that it's bringing to 40K. Like, I've joined
Oh,
a couple
absolutely.
of Facebook groups and stuff, like really getting into it. So we're definitely here to help people get into it, and I'll try to share more so people can ask questions. So I'm going to specifically state for our next round of questions, we want anything you want to know about playing, like the miniatures, tabletop, stuff like that. And we'll probably in the future do a little bit more with 40K going forward. We're going to try to
Absolutely.
have certain go-to topics for the show instead of being all over as much as we usually are. Just so we have solid things to bring people back every week. But we won't get obviously too specific all the time because you just can't. It gets boring. So I think that's pretty much it.
Yeah.
Unless Ryan, did you have anything else before we go?
I do want to say real quick, especially if you're trying to get into the game, be open and ask your questions. We are truly enthusiastic about helping you get into the hobby because I know for me, the more people to play it, the more better. Do not allow yourself to become discouraged by people that are being cruel or gatekeeping these hobbies. It is so wonderful for me, who started playing this game in 2002, to have this niche miniatures game that nobody knew anything about later become something that is all over TikTok, all over Facebook, that has video games coming out that are fantastic. I want more people in this hobby, same as I want more people playing Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder and everything else. Don't listen to the loud, obnoxious gatekeepers. They do not represent us. We want to help, and so don't hesitate.
All right, Bones, what do you got?
Yeah, I definitely encourage everybody to check out 40K in some form or fashion. It's great. If you decide to play, don't play a word bearer.
Don't play a word bearer. And with that, guys, we are going to go ahead and beam up to the ship fandom. We're going to be loitering in 40K for the next couple weeks, so be sure and hit us with those comments. Let us know what your questions are, and your question might just be featured in the next episode of Crossing the Nerdverse. It's been fun, guys. I'll see you later.